Recently, I watched The Lord of the Rings, but this time as an adult who has spent the last few years studying anthroposophy. Watching it now, the story opened up in an entirely different way. Specific moments reveal themselves as very accurate descriptions of spiritual realities, realities that I recognized from Steiner's work. So, Tolkien was a Catholic philologist who lived inside the oldest mythological layers of the North, while Steiner was a spiritual scientist who spent his life retrieving what those same ancient sources once carried as living knowledge. This video is an attempt to share some of my reflections. At its core, Tolkien's world is organized around loss. Loss as a natural, inevitable movement. Something ancient is always in the process of withdrawing from the world. The elves are leaving, the great trees are dwindling, the old languages are being forgotten. Middle Earth in the Third Age is already a diminished world, constantly carrying the memories of something far greater that came before. Steiner describes human spiritual evolution in almost identical terms. In his account, humanity has passed through successive great epochs, each characterized by a different relationship to the spiritual realm. In the earliest of these ages, human beings weren't yet individualized as we are today. Instead, they perceived spiritual realities directly through a faculty closer to what we might call a natural clairvoyance. Back then, the boundary between the physical and the spiritual was much thinner, and over long periods of time, the boundary thickened. And while that sounds like a loss, human beings actually gained something of incredible value in the process. The capacity for individual thinking, for inner freedom, and for the development of a self that truly belongs to itself. But the price of this freedom was a gradual withdrawal from direct spiritual perception. What once was simply seen now had to be remembered, and then sought, and then meticulously rebuilt through conscious inner work. The elves in Tolkien's world carry precisely this quality. They are beings who still inhabit both worlds simultaneously. They perceive what men cannot, and they remember what the rest of the world has forgotten. So their sadness is the grief of a consciousness that belongs to an earlier mode of existence, one that the world is slowly leaving behind. Their departure from Middle Earth is just a natural consequence of a world entering a new phase of development, a phase where their kind of perception no longer has a home. And men in this reading represents the emerging humanity. They are younger, less luminous, more bounded, but for that exact reason, they carry a potential the elves simply do not possess. Steiner was very clear that the development of individual ego consciousness, as costly as it was, opened up possibilities for freedom and love that could never have existed in that earlier blended condition. To put it simply, the elves are wiser, but men are more free. And Tolkien deeply understood this polarity. In the letters of J.R.R. Tolkien, he wrote about the nature of the elves with incredible precision. He described their immortality as a burden, as a literal binding to the world through all its lengthy, wearing changes. While men, on the other hand, they die. And in dying, they pass entirely outside the circles of this world, traveling towards something unknown even to the Valar, the angelic powers who shaped and govern the Middle Earth. Even they cannot follow where men go in death. And Tolkien called this the gift of men. And Steiner would immediately have recognized what that gift actually is. Steiner identified two primary adversarial forces working against the healthy development of humanity. He called them Lucifer and Ahriman. They are distinct spiritual forces, each with its own character, its own method, and its own particular seduction. Lucifer draws upward and away into a realm of light without shadow and into a will untethered from consequence and from the slow, difficult work of earthly development. Ahriman pulls in the opposite direction, downward, into matter, into mechanism, and into a world from which all spirit has been removed. His temptation is the hunger for total mastery over a reality stripped down to its measurable parts. Treebird said it plainly. He said, Saruman has a mind of metal and wheels and does not care for growing things. Just look at what Saruman does to Isengard. Ancient trees are torn out and replaced with furnaces and breeding pits, and the living, breathing landscape is converted into an engine of production. To a mind like his, nothing that grows has value in itself. Sauron operates at a different level entirely. His power works through the will. The ring is an instrument designed to reach another being at the exact level of their innermost freedom and subordinate it to a foreign will. Sauron wants to possess and to bring everything under his singular gaze. Behind Sauron stands Morgoth. He pours his own being into the substance of matter itself by corrupting it at the deepest level and expressing a hatred directed not at any particular thing, but at existence as such. Steiner pointed toward a third force, one that stands behind both Lucifer and Ahriman. He called it Sorath, the sun demon, the force he associated with the beast of the apocalypse. Lucifer and Ahriman work within the cosmic order, however destructively, while Sorath is oriented against that order entirely, against the Christ impulse in its most fundamental expression, and against the human being as a spiritual entity with a future. Where Lucifer and Ahriman seduce and corrupt, Sorath moves toward annihilation, toward the unmaking of what has been created. Tolkien placed Morgoth at the very root of everything that follows. Sauron was his servant. The orcs were his creation. The entire corruption of Middle-earth traces back to that original unmaking impulse. Through Steiner's framework, Lucifer and Ahriman are themselves in the service of something older and colder than either of them. And then there are the orcs. Tolkien's account of their origin is one of the most spiritually significant details in his entire mythology. Morgoth took elves, the most radiant beings in Middle Earth, beings of ancient clairvoyant perception and deep connection to the spiritual world, and he corrupted them over long ages through torture and the systematic breaking of the will. He twisted their nature into something that serves his own purposes. And Steiner's understanding of how adversarial forces operate is precisely this. They cannot create independently because creation requires a living connection to the spiritual source, which is a life force that these forces have completely severed in themselves. What they do instead is they capture and invert. So they take what has been developed through long spiritual efforts and twist it toward their own needs. And also, the higher the original development, the more potent and terrifying the inversion becomes. So, an orc carries within its distorted nature the inverted residue of everything the elves once were. So the hatred in an orc is a hatred that knows, however darkly, exactly what it has lost. So the great army of darkness is built entirely from the ruins of the highest. A palantir is a seeing stone, and in the hands of their original makers, the Noldor, they were instruments of knowledge and a way of maintaining awareness. Then Sauron captured them, and when Pippin looks into the palantir, he is pulled by the stone's own malevolent force. Toward an encounter he cannot resist. And what follows is a direct confrontation with Sauron's will, and Sauron, perceiving him through the stone, concludes that this is the ring bearer. Pippin has then allowed himself to be seen and identified. And this is the structure of every major technology platform operating today. Every search and every pattern of attention is registered and stored and fed into a picture of the individual that the individual never consented to build. The stone discloses to Sauron who Pippin is. It shows him what Pippin wants, what he fears, and precisely how much pressure is needed to bring him into submission. Steiner warned about exactly this mechanism. He described technologies that would sever the human being from the living, supersensible sources of cognition by drawing consciousness downward into a purely horizontal relationship with the material world. And the faculty for sensing spiritual reality will slowly wither as the stream of curated images replaces the inner living activity of thinking with a passive absorption of dead collective impressions. Steiner described the healthy development of cognition as something that must be cultivated entirely from within. It has to be cultivated through the strengthening of thinking and the development of inner attention, and also the gradual capacity to perceive in the direction of the supersensible. And The palantir is the precise inversion of that path. It orients perception outward and downward toward a world entirely shaped by a foreign will, while offering the flattering appearance of expanded knowledge. And it is also worth noting that a major American technology company named itself after Tolkien's Seeing Stones. The people who chose that name, they knew exactly what they were referencing. The ring wages its war entirely within the soul of the bearer. It begins by working on the selfhood, by corrupting the relationship between the will and the higher spiritual nature. So, first, desires clarify, and the sense of one's own importance deepens, and the capacity to justify what one wants expands without limit. And all of this feels exactly like strength. Steiner's description of black magic illuminates this mechanism. Black magic is the deliberate application of spiritual knowledge and force toward the subordination of another being's will. Sauron poured his own will into the ring by making it a vessel for that precise mode of spiritual domination. So, to carry the ring is to carry his will inside your own, and to feel that foreign will move through your desires, your reasoning, and also your sense of what matters. So, Tolkien gives us two characters who together form a portrait of what sustained exposure to the ring does to a soul across time. Bilbo carried the ring for 60 years, and by some grace of his hobbit nature, he managed something no other bearer accomplished through an act of pure will. Namely, he gave it up. Yet, decades later, when he encounters it again in Rivendell, the hunger surfaces immediately, which illustrates how physical separation does not end its claim on the soul. Smeagol, he carried it for 500 years, and what we encounter in Gollum is the wreckage of that subordination. Smeagol still exists inside Gollum. He is recognizable, even pitiable, and capable of moments of attachment and gratitude. And it produces a permanent state of inner war between the remnant of the original self and the personality that centuries of foreign will had constructed in its place. The result is a being locked endless in inner warfare and aware on some level of its own ruin while cycling between moments of clarity and absolute compulsion. Frodo shows us the acute crisis, while Gollum shows us the final destination, and the fact that it is ultimately Gollum in a moment of blind greed who destroys the ring by falling into the fire carries its own profound weight. So, even a being reduced to that condition retained without knowing it, a vital role in a larger cosmic pattern. The Lord of the Rings contains three primary initiatory paths. Each one is entirely distinct in its character, its method, and what it ultimately demands of the soul who undergoes it. Rudolf Steiner described initiation as a fundamental alteration of the very structure of the initiate's being. Latent capacities become active, and the relationship between the individual and the spiritual world shifts permanently. In the classical mystery traditions, this event was always associated with a direct encounter with what lies beyond the threshold of ordinary existence. All three of Tolkien's initiatory figures pass through exactly such a confrontation, and each faces it in a form that corresponds precisely to their own unique nature and task. Gandalf's initiation is perhaps the most architecturally complete. In the deep mines of Moria, he faces the Balrog, which is a Maya just like himself. These are immortal angelic spirits, but the Balrog is one that chose the path of Morgoth in the earliest ages of the world. This is a being of Gandalf's own order and his own origin who took the opposite path. And looking at it through an esoteric lens, the Balrog functions as the dark mirror of Gandalf's own angelic lineage, the ancient, unredeemed potential of the order he belongs to, standing directly at the threshold of his transformation. And the confrontation ends with both of them falling together into the abyss. Gandalf passes through fire and water through a long unconscious state and returns completely transformed. He later says, I passed through fire and death and was sent back. Steiner describes the initiatory death in almost identical terms. The candidate passes through an experience structurally equivalent to physical death, requiring a complete dissolution of the ordinary relationship between the physical and the spiritual body. What returns is a being with vastly expanded capacities and an entirely different quality of spiritual authority. He returns fully white, and in every mystery tradition that has worked with color as a living language, white carries the same meaning, the unveiled presence of the spirit itself. So Gandalf the Grey moved through the world in concealment, while Gandalf the White has nothing left to conceal. And then there is Galadriel. When Frodo offers her the ring in the forest of Lothlorien, she reveals to him and to herself exactly what she would become if she accepted the ring. The vision that arises is a dark, dreadful version of herself. It is Galadriel with her own power and her wisdom and her own ancient longing. And this is the doppelganger or the double in the precise esoteric sense that Steiner uses the term. This goes beyond the Jungian shadow. To Steiner, the double is a distinct spiritual being that has accumulated everything within us that remains untransformed. It holds everything our spiritual development has failed to redeem by standing before us at the threshold in its full terrifying dimensions. So it is a face to face encounter with what we have carried across lifetimes. Galadriel meets it fully. She sees exactly what she would become, and she openly acknowledges that the desire is potent within her. Still, she consciously chooses to remain who she is. And that is when she says, I passed the test. And the test was whether she could stand before her own double at the threshold and emerge with her identity intact and her inner freedom preserved. And that requires a spiritual strength forged over long ages, and in that sense, we feel the full, agonizing weight of what she is surrendering. Frodo receives a wound that simply does not heal. He carries the ring further than any being has ever carried it, and the sheer weight of that act strips him of almost everything: his health, his connection to ordinary life, and also his ability to ever truly rest inside the Shire he sacrificed everything to save. So by the time he reaches the crack of doom, the corruption is so absolute that he cannot complete the task through his own free will. And he claims the ring for himself at the very last moment, and it is only through Gollum's desperate intervention of biting off his finger and falling into the fire in a flash of blind greed that finally destroys the ring. Steiner returned again and again to the idea that wisdom is crystallized pain, and in Frodo's case, suffering borne on behalf of others, carried to its absolute limit, it will transform the soul at a deeper level than any conscious understanding can reach. So, what Frodo carries back from Mordor is the permanent imprint of everything he endured on behalf of others. When he sails into the west toward the undying land, he is moving towards something entirely beyond the circles of this world. He cannot remain in the Shire because what he went through has already made him a citizen of a different realm. The entire fellowship functions as a picture of what Steiner called a karmic community, which is a gathering of distinct souls, each carrying their own karmic background, who meet at a specific moment in time to fulfill a shared spiritual destiny. Aragorn carries the weight of his bloodline into battle, stepping into a karmic task that has waited generations for resolution. And Boromir's tragic fall and final sacrifice clear something for his people that his strength alone never could have. And Samwise Gamgee, the most apparently ordinary member of the Nine, performs perhaps the most spiritually essential function of all. When the weight of the ring begins to dissolve Frodo's connection to everything real and embodied, it is Sam who holds the thread. So without him, Frodo does not reach Mordor. Steiner was clear that individual initiation always serves as a larger collective destiny, and the fellowship is a precise image of that truth. Tolkien finished The Lord of the Rings in 1949 after more than a decade of work. He was a storyteller and a philologist who spent his life inside the oldest surviving layers of Northern myth. He set out to build a mythology by drawing from the deepest sources available to him, while Steiner spent his life retrieving what the ancient mystery centers once held as living knowledge. Tolkien spent his life building a world from the bones of the same sources those mystery centers drew from. I hope you enjoyed the video. This is all I have for today, and you are welcome to leave your reflections in the comment section below. Thank you so much for watching.